The New York Times has obtained and published previously never-before-seen photos of the first prisoners detained at Guantanamo Bay. Taken in early 2002, the photos were intended to give senior military leadership a closer look at the prison's detention and interrogation operations. The Times reports that if taken by news photographers today, these images of Guantanamo would not clear the base's current censorship policy.
Just this week, legislation cutting $100 billion from the country's defense budget was introduced by Democratic Representatives Mark Pocan and Barbara Lee. Pocan said in a statement, quote, "The amount of money the defense industry convinces Congress to spend each year doesn't protect us from real threats like climate change, pandemics, or cyber attacks. It only lines contractors' pockets. Just imagine for once if we let the world in funding peace and not war." Yeah, so these photographs were revealing, in part because it's the first time we've seen these kind of pictures. And there were the subtext, the political context of these was really interesting. So there was one photograph that people were talking about where one of the guards had put a flag in the blindfolded, handcuffed prisoner's hand. And it was really evocative of, the pictures we got out of Abu Ghraib and kind of the misconduct that was happening there. And now all of these years, 20 plus years out, when so few people, it's like a number in the teens that have actually been prosecuted. There's been so little to come of it. It was such an outrage in earlier election cycles. I remember when I was in college, it was like the crux of a lot of our political activism and resistance to the Bush administration, that it still persists, and that there doesn't seem to be the kind of political engagement around this issue that there used to be. Obama ran on closing Guantanamo. To have these pictures come out now is a kind of stark reminder of how little things have changed.
Oh, absolutely. And it's also a stark reminder of the incredible short-term memory problem we have in politics, where we have some really horrific evils perpetrated by the U.S. government, even to this day, and people deprived of their due process and deprived of their day in court. And yet, for whatever reason, people don't really care about this too much. And honestly, this is, I think, a testament to the power of photojournalism to some degree, because I was also, when researching this segment a little bit, I was noticing that Time magazine also sent some photojournalists to cover, what limited things they could access at Guantanamo, I think around 2013. And I mean, the photos that emerged from that, although they didn't have as many people in them, we're talking 6 by 8 foot metal cages kept outdoors, almost akin to what you'd see at a dog kennel or a municipal animal shelter. There's something absolutely striking about these images, and it's horrifying that they capture the public imagination for a very short amount of time, but it isn't something that sort of lingers in our political discourse today.
Yeah, it does feel like a bigger problem politically, that our appetite for sticking with a story for a long time is little to none. I mean, during the Trump years, liberals lamented that they didn't seem to be able to get a story to stick. Part of it does seem to me to be rooted in this distrust of the media culture more broadly. That, why it's about who you trust as a figurehead as opposed to the underlying story, because people's news sources are so bifurcated at this point, and there's an almost defensiveness, and I feel this myself, and I have to respond to it and try to get myself in line, a defensiveness to want to defend your position because the stakes seem so high, and there's very little in terms of having a conversation about how we want our country to run and what we want the world to look like, and how we can build toward those kinds of shared goals, because I do think there are a great deal of national values that we do share, and people see pictures like this that do seem to be objective evidence and do have a lot of simpatico about distaste for the fact that that's what our country is up to.
I mean, I think this is actually something that I will absolutely give the Biden administration just a little bit of credit on when I think about the possibility of perhaps some Pentagon spending being cut, when I think about the admittedly imperfect withdrawal that we saw in, what month was it?
August? From Afghanistan?
Yeah, the Afghanistan withdrawal, I believe, in August of last year, which was, I think it's fair to say that it was botched in some ways, but also when you actually consider what was the quote unquote right way to do that, how could that have been executed perfectly? I think it's fair to give Biden some credit for the fact that he at least delivered on this promise. And this is something that people, the GOP is pretty horrible on this. Honestly, a lot of Democrats are really horrible on this. They will sometimes talk a big talk about the anti-war cause, and I will give Biden some credit where due for saying, hey, look, the cost, the fiscal cost and the cost in human lives and the cost in intervention that's really not working to actually stabilize the situation, it's time for us to stop bearing those costs.
Yeah. It is interesting, we did a segment earlier about inflation and gas prices and root causes and what to do about it. And the elephant in the room is the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
Yeah.
And despite the urgency expressed by the Democratic Party and their understanding that they have to do something lest they get completely demolished in midterms, that urgency doesn't seem to come up to having any kind of conversation about how to end that conflict more quickly. Instead, if anything, the interests of the defense industry seem to be prevailing there, with Joe Biden going to give speeches down at the Lockheed Martin plant and sending off missiles and things that are calibrated not to end the conflict as much as to extend the conflict, at least according to some of the experts that we've talked to on this show and that I've talked to elsewhere. And it is fascinating to me that as much urgency as there is around gas prices, the defense budget and military spending seems to be this untouchable quantity, even if it means that Democrats get wiped out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely a problem that's very endemic to American politics. And I think we see it would be to Biden's credit if he began to sort of stem some of the flow of defense contractor money and influence in our politics. But, I will take what I can get in terms of Afghanistan withdrawal. And frankly, in terms of the decent amount of restraint that has been shown thus far when it comes to Ukraine and Russia from the U.S. perspective. But at the same time, all of those things are subject to change. And I am not particularly optimistic that there's any sort of prevailing massive anti-war sentiment in the U.S. that has any sort of durable staying power. This is something that only people on the very fringes of the left and civil libertarians feel strongly about, but the vast majority of people just are fairly neocon, fairly hawkish.
It's odd. I found myself in a situation over the weekend where I was having a very pleasant conversation with a stranger at the dog park, and Ukraine, Russia came up.
Karen? Was it Amy Cooper?
No, it was local, and she was nice, and I got the sense of it was someone who shared my politics.
Yeah.
But even the whiff of I forget even how it came up, but potential hunger, famine globally as a consequence of Europe's breadbasket being held up in conflict, and there was an attribution of the cause and effect of, isn't it horrible the global south is going to have to deal with this because Russia won't give the grain. And I was like, well, it's a little that the West is wanting the rest of the world to adhere to these sanctions, even if it means that their people starve. And is this really their conflict? And I found myself having all this hesitation about even getting into that kind of a conversation because of how polarizing these conversations are and how uniformly, regardless of people's left-right political orientation, there is this real commitment to being rah-rah for this war effort because it's been framed as this humanitarian crisis, which I understand that it is a humanitarian crisis, but there's asymmetry between how this humanitarian crisis is being addressed versus other ones, and the proliferation of Ukraine flags and this real sense of identity around this particular war effort that is really in contrast with the kind of anti-war movement I would expect to see in a moment like this.
And we've seen the flimsiest possible engagement with a lot of the Russia-Ukraine stuff. I mean, we saw this with sort of the widespread cancellation of anything with Russia in the name.
Yeah.
I actually covered this story for Reason yesterday, a cancel culture situation at a Bushwick bar where there was going to be this interesting food politics talk talking about how Putin was actually sort of co-opting Stalinist tactics. But the fact that Russia and Ukraine were in the title proved to be I hate the word triggering, but spicy for a decent number of Brooklynites, and it actually really deprived people of the opportunity to understand this issue with greater depth. It's like people are much more interested in ensuring that Disney and Warner Brothers, don't do theatrical releases in Russia, or that Russia House in DuPont Circle changes its name.
Yes.
It's people are so much more interested in this posturing as opposed to actually having any sort of deeper and prolonged understanding of the dynamics at play here. And Russia and Ukraine have a really, really fascinating history. So I implore our viewers to sort of be part of the solution there and actually begin to understand these things with more depth. Tomorrow on Rising, Robbie will be back with you all. I had a great time filling in, though.
It was really good to have you. I enjoyed these chats. Women be talking. We could go all day. I really did enjoy this, though, Liz.
You're going to get canceled. Come on.
Whatever. I can handle it. It won't be my first rodeo. Look, you guys should be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of this content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. So thank you, and we'll see you tomorrow.